Everybody doing? Hotep, how's everybody doing today? All right, hey, this is Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. I'm a talk show host, researcher, lecturer, and writer. It is Friday, September 14th. Friday, September 14th, 2018. And we are live today. All right, so everybody share this broadcast and share this broadcast on your Facebook page. Invite your friends to tune in also. All right, so I wanted to talk about a story from NBC.com and also News1.com picked up this story. And this deals with more African-American parents homeschooling their children, okay? More African-American parents homeschooling their children. And the reason why more of our parents are choosing to homeschool their children also, okay? Which is very, very important. And I saw the video from NBC News. It actually aired on NBC News. And some of the footage it was shot at this year's Liberated Minds Black Homeschooling Education Expo. And I'm there each year. I was there when NBC was there filming, okay? Now, they didn't get me in any of the footage, but I saw some of the people. I was in the area where they were filming, okay? And when we look at, they actually looked at a national study, okay? And when we look at this, the article from News1.com is entitled, African Americans are choosing homeschooling to teach kids Black history, okay? And when we look at some different studies, and I've talked about this in the past, we'll deal with this a little bit today also, the history of slavery, African-American history in general, but specifically the history of slavery is being mistaught in our children's schools, okay? And this has wide-ranging negative implications, not just for African-American children, but for other ethnic groups as well, okay? Because the history of slavery, then the Civil War, Reconstruction, etc., Jim Crow era, that is essential to understanding why things are the way they are today, okay? And it's essential to understanding the maldistribution of wealth, power, and resources, okay, in this country. And it has a large impact on why African Americans are in the predicament that we're in today, okay? So if we look at, first, if we look at the article from News1.com, and I'll also do a brief preview of the online course that I teach as well, which is on demand, called Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school, okay? And that's available at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. But you can use that if you teach your children at home. You can use that in your teachings as well, okay? All right, so U.S. history. So what we found is that U.S. history classes devote less than 10% of classroom time to Black history, according to national research, all right? So homeschooling is an increasingly popular way for Americans to teach their kids and other students about Black history, and it is becoming more widespread, says a new report. Now, one of the reasons more parents turn to homeschooling, okay, and I find this when I'm at the Black Homeschooling Conference myself, it takes place the third weekend in July each year. When I'm there, I talk to a number of different parents. I'm a vendor and I'm one of the presenters at the Black Homeschooling Conference. And I talk to a number of different parents, and one of the reasons they cite for homeschooling their children is because of the lack of history dealing with our people that's taught in the regular school system. Okay. All right. So, all right, just a second here. What is this? Okay. All right, let's continue. So NBC News reported U.S. history classrooms in public schools spend a limited amount of time on African American history, less than 10% of total course hours, according to a 2015 study cited in a research paper released by the National Council of Social Studies in 2017, the National Council of Social Studies in 2017. Okay, so I went and I read this. They have a link there to the National Council of Social Studies and the study. I'm going to post a link here for you on the thread of the broadcast. It's called "The Status of Black History in U.S. Schools and Society." The status of Black history in U.S. schools and society. Okay. All right. So some schools may also cover some, not all, of the Black history facts moments and the moments that parents feel children should know. All right. And when we look at the study from the Southern Poverty Law Center that I'll talk about a little bit as well, it's called Teaching Hard History, American Slavery, Teaching Hard History, American Slavery. One of the things they do in that study is a 52-page study, and they deal with how the history of slavery is incorrectly taught oftentimes in our children's schools and across the country, not just schools where African Americans are the predominant student body, but they looked at schools across the country. And they also deal with how to change the way the history of slavery is taught in our children's schools as well. Okay, and you can download it. It's a study you can download for free. It's a 52-page study. It's at splcenter.org, Southern Poverty Law Center. This is I downloaded the study and I went and got it printed up. Okay, so this is the actual study here. And we'll talk about this a little bit, but it's called Teaching Hard History, American Slavery. Okay. And what's extremely important to understand is, one, I understand the majority of African American children are not going to be primarily homeschooled, but there is supplemental information that parents can teach at home. And then also parents can create Black homeschooling networks that takes the pressure off of just one parent. And it's a collective, it's a cooperative that teach the students. And these are some of the things that are taught at the Black Homeschooling Conference that I attend each year, the third weekend in July. Okay. If you go to liberatedmindsexpo.com, liberatedmindsexpo.com, you can get more information about the expo and about homeschooling African American children. And it's homeschooling from an African-centered perspective. Okay. It's not enough just to homeschool Black children. We have to homeschool them from an African-centered perspective, because you can homeschool African-American children from a European perspective, from a Eurocentric perspective. Okay, so we have to be clear on what it is that we're doing. Okay, so some schools may also only cover not all of the Black history facts and moments that parents feel children should know. Schools might start with slavery and go to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., glossing over other prominent but lesser known moments. One interviewee pointed out in the interview from NBC News, okay? And this is something that we find and they talk about in the study as well from the Southern Poverty Law Center. And they talk about how oftentimes they'll deal with the abolitionists. They'll talk about Harriet Tubman. They'll talk about Frederick Douglass. They'll deal very little with why slavery started in this country, the history of slavery, the harsh conditions that took place, why the Civil War was fought. See, they'll deal very little with the why these things happen, okay? And then also, they don't relate this as well to white supremacy and racism, because to understand the history of slavery in this country, to understand the history of the laws, like whether you're talking about the one drop rule or one of the early laws, like the doctrine of exclusion in 1638 in the colony of Maryland. Dr. Claude Anderson was one of my teachers. He talks about this in his book, Black Labor, White Wealth. And the doctrine of exclusion stated that Negroes or Black people should never be permitted to enjoy the fruits of white society. And it's later going to be modified and adopted by the other colonies around 1665 to state that Negroes should be relegated to a non-compensated, non-competitive managed workforce for the comfort building of white society. And this is going to help lay the foundation for racism in this country. You have things like the Casual Killing Act of 1668 and 1669 in Virginia, okay, which made it made it legal. It decriminalized white people killing slaves in the process of trying to discipline them. Okay, this is in the colony of Virginia. Okay, but to understand all that, you have to understand white supremacy and racism, what it is and how it works. Okay, so oftentimes when this type of history is taught in schools, the why and the relationship to white supremacy is not discussed. Okay, and we'll get to that some when I get to the report from the Southern Poverty Law Center. All right. How's everybody doing? Share this broadcast on your Facebook page. Invite your friends to tune in. And we'll come to some of your comments here in just a minute. And if you like this type of information, also be sure to register for the online courses that I teach that deals with this type of information. Understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. That's a 14-hour, 7-session online course that I teach. We have it in a bundle pack. It's all on demand. 10 courses in the bundle pack. It's $60, regularly $130. We just posted the link here on the thread of the broadcast, and also it's at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. All right, so let's continue. Let me look at the article here. I'll post a link to the article from newsone.com in just a minute. Okay, so one of the reasons many parents turn to homeschooling, in which they create their own curriculums, is to provide kids with a more comprehensive education about African American history, as reported by NBC News. U.S. history classrooms and public schools spend a limited amount of time on African American history, less than 10% of total course hours, according to a 2015 study. Okay, I'm sorry, I read that already. With parents taking their child or children education into their own hands, they can fill in the gaps and provide a personal touch while teaching Black history education. Parents can also turn to other avenues, such as trips to the National Museum of African American History and Culture, an educational space that speaks to the national importance of examining Black history, according to LeGarrette J. King. And LeGarrette J. King is the author of the National Council of Social Studies research paper, okay? And that's the paper that I'll come to in just a minute. That's entitled "The Status of Black History in U.S. Schools and Society." The Status of Black History in U.S. Schools and Society. And that paper was released by the National Council of Social Studies, okay? So I'll come to that in just a minute. All right, so it's clear that homeschooling has become a quote-unquote form of resistance for parents who seek a better alternative for teaching kids about Black history. And this is something that was talked about in the interview that NBC News did. It's a form of resistance. And once again, they shot footage at the Liberated Minds Black Homeschooling Education Expo. And actually, one of the sisters who is featured in the piece from NBC News, she was interviewed at the Black Homeschooling Conference, okay? So from one study, approximately 220,000 African-American children in the U.S. are being homeschooled. That study came out a few years ago, so I think it's more now, okay? And what people have to understand is, and what I talk about, I'm an advocate for homeschooling, but I'm also an advocate for having good public schools, because those are our taxpayer dollars being used for public schools. So the history of African people, African history, needs to be taught in public schools as well. Not just the public schools where we are the predominant student body, but they need to be taught in schools all across the country. Our history needs to be taught in schools all across the country because, as Dr. Carter G. Woodson said, and I've done extensive research on Dr. Carter G. Woodson, he was the co-founder of the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, September 9th, 1915 in Chicago. He also created Negro History Week in 1926, which in 1976 became Black History Month, which is now officially known as African American History Month. It was called African American History Month before Donald Trump called it that. It was called that long before that, okay? But Dr. Carter G. Woodson was an educator. He was the second African American to get a PhD from Harvard, first African American of slave descent to get a PhD from Harvard, because Dr. W.B. Du Bois, who got his PhD from Harvard in 1895, Du Bois was born to free parents. He was not of slave ancestry, okay? But Dr. Carter G. Woodson felt that bigotry and the prejudice that was directed towards African Americans largely came from our history not being taught in the schools and people not understanding the contributions that African Americans have made to this country, but also the contributions that African people have made to the world as a whole. Okay, so he felt that our history needed to be taught in every school across the country, and I totally concur with that. All right, so if we look at the study, the status of Black history in U.S. schools and society, which was done by LeGarrette J. King, okay, for the National Council of Social Studies. Very briefly here, I'll share an excerpt with you, and I'll post a link to the study here on the thread of the broadcast. And you can just Google this and pull it up. But it said, the year 2015 marked a century since Carter G. Woodson and his colleagues created the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, okay? Originally, so today it's called the Association for the Study of African American History. Originally it was called Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, okay? And this was the first Black history organization that successfully promoted, researched, preserved, interpreted, and disseminated information about Black life, history, and culture to the global community. The organization that he co-founded, okay, yeah, and he was not the sole founder. There were 4 other co-founders. So I've done a lot of research on Dr. Carter G. Woodson, because I do, a lot of you see, clips of my lectures and things like this. I put on Facebook, you see them on YouTube. I do an extensive presentation for African American History Month dealing with the origins of African American History Month. Okay, and unfortunately, too many of our people celebrate African American History Month and have no understanding of the history. You have to deal with Dr. Carter G. Woodson, because when you study the history of the monthly celebration, it was never designed to be the only time of the year we study our history, number one. Number two, it was supposed to acknowledge and celebrate the accomplishments and achievements that African Americans have contributed to this country, and the accomplishments and achievements of African people on the continent of Africa as well. So the African history portion oftentimes gets totally left out of the conversation, and we just deal with from 1619 up until the present. And it was never designed to do that, because we haven't studied the history behind the celebration. So this is why we recycle the same 15 to 20 sanitized Negroes every year. Okay, the sanitized Negroes that we perceive are acceptable to white people, we recycle them every year. Okay, that's not what it was designed to do. So Dr. Carter G. Woodson, with the help of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, had a profound impact on efforts to institutionalize Black history in schools between 1915 and 1950. Dr. Woodson and his colleagues established a foundation for K through 12, kindergarten through 12th grade, Black history education. I mean, in 1921, this brother founded a publishing company where they were publishing textbooks for our schools and HBCUs, things like this. And his books he published through the publishing company he founded, Associated Publishers, Inc. I mean, this was a brilliant brother. Okay, Dr. Carter G. Woodson. Now, they did so by authoring several K through 12 Black history textbooks, designing Black history home study courses for school-age children, establishing a K through 12 Black history teacher journal, and promoting Negro History Week, now Black History Month in schools. This is what they were doing between 1915 and 1950, because Dr. Carter G. Woodson died in 1950, okay? They were doing this back then, okay? But we act like all this stuff is brand new. No, it's not brand new. We don't understand our history, okay? How's everybody doing? Share this broadcast on your Facebook page. And you know what? I forgot to share this on my personal page. Share this broadcast on your Facebook page. We're going to come to your comments here. I'm going to grab this book to show you also right quick, okay? But see, a people's history and culture teaches them how to deal with the problems of the past, in the present, and the future to meet the needs of the community. A people's history and culture teaches them how to deal with the problems of the past, in the present, and the future to meet the needs of the community. All right. So every ethnic group in America, for the most part, they have their history and culture intact. They use it to fight for scarce wealth, power, and resources. This is why every ethnic group in America, for the most part, are the #1 employers of their own people, except for African Americans, because our foundation, our history and culture has been stripped away from us. It gives us our values, our interests, and our principles, our VIPs. It creates a cultural paradigm that we see reality through. Because our history and culture has largely been taken away from us, European history and culture has been superimposed upon us, and we've been taught to see reality through the eyes of Europeans. And as Bantu Stephen Biko said, one of our great South African freedom fighters who died in 1977 fighting against apartheid in South Africa, and Denzel Washington portrayed Bantu Stephen Biko in the 1987 movie called Cry Freedom. Bantu Stephen Biko said the most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. The most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. So we must take our minds back, and we have to take it back unapologetically. We don't ask permission to take our minds back, okay? So we have to understand this. How's everybody doing, okay? How you all like this type of information? Who's at work? Who's at work during lunchtime watching this, okay? So don't get trouble at work, okay? Don't get trouble at work. All right, Alba, let's get a few of your comments in here. Alba said, how can we talk more about Black history in public schools throughout the school year instead of just February? Okay, so that's a good question, Alba. What happens is African-American parents need to go to these school board meetings. They need to meet with the teachers, okay, and talk about the type of information you want incorporated into the system, okay, into the classroom. One of the things you can do, you can start with this. Now, it's very important, okay? It's very important when we have these conversations, we need to deal with facts and evidence, because, see, we'll go in with feelings and emotions and not deal with facts and evidence. So this is why I tell African-American parents, you got to take the studies in with you. Take the studies from the Blacks in Higher Education. Take the study, download this one right here, Teaching Hard History, American Slavery. Teaching Hard History, American Slavery, okay, from the Southern Poverty Law Center. And it's a 52-page study, and it gives really good recommendations of how to incorporate this type of information into the schools, okay? Into the schools, and age appropriate as well. All right, but we have to understand this. There's another study that I'll show you that I'll come to because there's studies that show how this type of information positively impacts African-American children's self-esteem and positively impacts their academic performance. Okay, there was a joint study back about 2012, 2013 from the University of Pittsburgh and Harvard University that shows this. Okay, so so Europeans have done the studies. They know that teaching African American children their history positively impacts their self-esteem and positively impacts their academic performance. They know this. Okay, so we have to present the studies to them. This is why we have to go in with facts and evidence, not feelings and emotions. All right, that's extremely important. Okay, so let's continue here. Okay, Gerald said, love the information. Christopher said, we need to learn more about the Moors because a lot of African Americans don't know who they are. Yeah, and see, I teach about the Moors in the online course that I teach, and you can use this with your children as well. It's not vulgar and not cursing and things like this, right? The online course that I teach is called Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Because you can't deal with the history of, you can't even talk about the transatlantic slave trade without dealing with the history of the Moors. And this is one of the best books dealing with the history of the Moors, Golden Age of the Moor, edited by Dr. Ida Van Sertima, okay? I think it's still out of print. You can get this from Ivor Van Sertima's widow runs his website. Okay, it's about $30 because on Amazon they're trying to charge $200-300 for the book. Okay, but that's one of the best books dealing with the history of the Moors. We just posted the link to the online course that I teach also. We have them all on demand. They're all on demand. You can watch at your own pace. And it's a 10-course online bundle pack, 10 of my courses, including Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa. That's on sale $60, regularly $130, okay? But Golden Age of the Moor is one of the good ones. And we have to understand a chronology of history also. We're coming to some more of your comments here, okay? We have to understand a chronology of history, okay? But that study from the Southern Poverty Law Center, and their website is splcenter.org, splcenter.org, okay? And just search for Teaching Hard History, American Slavery. Okay, that's a good place to start. Let's see. Let me get a couple more of your comments in here. Sonia said, the way our American history is taught in public schools, we didn't really exist before we were brought over to the Americas as slaves in a civilized society. And that's problematic. And see, and what we have to understand is that African people were here in this land we call the United States of America tens of thousands of years. We were here before Native Americans came into existence. And see, people need to read this book. This is one of the books that I use in the online course that I teach as reference. I use Golden Age of the Moor, but also use this one. This is from my friend, Dr. David Imhotep. He's the author of this book. He has a PhD in ancient African history. The name of this book is The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence. The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence, okay? I'll come to some of that information here in just a minute. All right, I was just trying to get in some of your comments here. Darlene said, I don't know how we can pretend the system was created for us. They just pay themselves to oversee us. Well, see, this is it's one thing to say the system wasn't created for us. It's another thing to do something about it. If you in a predominantly African American city, and the majority of the children that go to that school system are Black, then we need to make it what we want to make it. See, that's an excuse to say, oh, the system wasn't made for us. Unless you're going to evaporate, or unless you're going to leave tomorrow, then what are you going to do about it? Those are your taxpayer dollars being misappropriated. So what we should, if we operate based upon self-determination, then we need to take control of that school system that the majority of our children go to. We need to create we need to make it what we want it to be, as opposed to just saying, oh, it was not created for us, and then sit back and don't do anything about it. Those are your taxpayer dollars. All right. Your thoughts create feelings, your feelings create actions and behaviors, your actions and behaviors create results. And what you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. All right. We have to be involved in the oversight of public education system, but we have not been involved in the oversight process since the implementation of Brown versus Board of Education. Really? Okay. All right, let's continue here. Okay, so let's go back to the study, The Status of Black History in U.S. Schools and Society by LeGarrette J. King. Okay, so Dr. Carter G. Woodson, with the help of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, had a profound impact on efforts to institutionalize Black history in schools between 1915 and 1950. So 1915 is a pivotal year. 1915 is basically looked at as the first year of the Great Migration, 1915 to about 1970. You have 5 million to 6 million African Americans who migrate from the South up north and out west. This is also during World War I, okay, which is 1914 and 1918. 1915 is also the 50th year anniversary of the ending of the Civil War, okay, and also the freeing of the enslaved Africans from chattel slavery because of the 13th Amendment, which was ratified December 6, 1865, and adopted December 18, 1865. 1915 is also the year, February 8, 1915, is when the movie The Birth of a Nation debuted, and the movie The Birth of a Nation caused race riots in the streets. It took America by storm, and the film The Birth of a Nation rejuvenated the Ku Klux Klan, which had pretty much died out by 1915 because the Ku Klux Klan was founded in Pulaski, Tennessee, December 24th, 1865, on Christmas Eve, just about a week after the 13th Amendment was adopted, which freed 4 million enslaved Africans. And this terrorist organization is founded. So 1915 is a very, very pivotal year in history, okay? And we know the film The Birth of a Nation caused race riots in the streets. President Woodrow Wilson, who was a white supremacist and a friend of D.W. Griffith. D.W. Griffith was the director of the film. They did a screening of the movie The Birth of a Nation at the White House also for President Woodrow Wilson. All right, now, so Woodson and his colleagues established a foundation for K through 12 Black history education between 1915 and 1950. They did so by authoring several K through 12 Black history textbooks, designing Black history home study courses for school-aged children. They were doing this between 1915 and 1950. Designing Black history home study courses for school-aged children, establishing a K through 12 Black history teacher journal, and promoting Negro History Week, which is now Black History Month in schools. Dr. Carter G. Woodson envisioned these programs as temporary, and only the first steps at integrating K through 12 Black history within the mainstream social studies curriculum. He felt that our history needed to be taught in every school across the country, okay? Now, the mainstream social studies curriculum, however, either largely ignored Black history or misrepresented the subject. Early renditions of history textbooks typically classified Black people as docile, uncivilized, and lazy. And these are the images that we largely see represented in the media back at this time as well, to reinforce white supremacy and racism. And also, this is why you have the majority of the Confederate monuments erected. So when we deal with the debate over the Confederate monuments, most people don't understand the history behind the Confederate monuments. The two biggest periods of time that you have the largest spike in Confederate monuments erected, that takes place from 1895 to about 1915, okay? And 1895 is the year before Plessy versus Ferguson. During this period of time, Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896, U.S. Supreme Court case, separate but equal. This is going to really cement the Jim Crow laws and bring in a whole new round of terrorism, white domestic terrorism and lynchings against African Americans. And then you have 1955 to about 1970, okay? So 1955 is the year after Brown versus Board of Education, U.S. Supreme Court case, which was May 27, 1954. And after Brown versus Board of Education, you have a whole backlash from the white supremacists, especially in the South. You have a whole backlash against desegregating the schools. In the state of Virginia, the governor of Virginia shut down all the schools for the rest of the school year when Brown versus Board of Education decision came up, because they didn't want to desegregate the schools. In Mississippi, the White Citizens Council was formed in 1954 after Brown versus Board of Education as a direct backlash to desegregation and African Americans fighting for their civil rights. And the White Citizens Council starts in Mississippi and it spreads all throughout the southern states, okay? And in many ways, the White Citizens Council is even worse than the Ku Klux Klan, all right? So we have to understand this history and how it provides a trajectory that creates the circumstances and conditions that we deal with today. Okay, so early renditions of history textbooks typically classified Black people as docile, uncivilized, and lazy. For example, a 1934 history textbook analysis by Lawrence Reddick observed that Black people were portrayed as being content as slaves. They like to, quote, sing, dance, crack jokes, and laugh, admired bright colors, never in a hurry, and were always ready to let things go until the morrow or to tomorrow. So this is a 1934 history textbook, okay? All right? And they're showing all these negative stereotypes of African Americans. Now, these examples illustrated a social studies curriculum mirroring a U.S. culture that elevated those considered to be white while simultaneously demeaning all of those considered to be Black. It was not until the middle of the 20th century that mainstream social studies textbooks began to eliminate text that was explicitly racist. Inspired by the 1960s civil rights movement, systemic efforts to mainstream K through 12 Black history began to build momentum, okay? I'll post a link here. You can read the rest of this. It's just too much for me to read here. But this is an excerpt of the study that was cited in the article from newsone.com dealing with African Americans are choosing homeschooling to teach kids Black history. And they have a section here towards the end called Black History Mandates. The establishment of Black history mandates is in a number of states is another sign of the popularity of Black history. States such as Arkansas, Florida, Illinois, New Jersey, New York, Mississippi, and Rhode Island have passed laws requiring Black history to be taught in public schools with special K through 12 Black history oversight committees, okay? Other states such as California, Colorado, Michigan, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Washington have passed educational laws regarding Black history with no special oversight committee, okay? Okay, so we'll post a link here. You can read the rest of this. I don't have time to get through all of it. We'll post the link here. But that study is the status of Black history in U.S. schools and society, okay? And that is from National Council of Social Studies. That came out in 2017. We'll post the link there, right? Okay, so let's see, how's everybody doing? Share this broadcast on your Facebook page as well. Darlene said there may be laws, but I never saw any oversight committee for Blacks in the state of California. All right. Okay. All right. So I'm going to pull up this. I'm going to pull up this study from Southern Poverty Law Center, Teaching Hard History, American Slavery. So I first found out about this in February 1st, 2018. I saw an article from theatlantic.com, what kids are really learning about slavery, what kids are really learning about slavery, okay? And let me bring this up here. A second here. Okay, share screen. And what it talks about is how a new report finds that the topic of slavery is mistaught and often sentimentalized, and students are alarmingly misinformed as a result. Okay, and this is this has a wide-ranging negative impact as well. Okay, let's see here. Start this up. Okay, and one of the things they did an online survey of 1,000 K through 12 students, 1,000. I'm sorry, 1,000 high school seniors. And they found that only 8% of 12th graders knew that slavery was the central cause to the Civil War. Only 8% of 12th graders knew that slavery was the central cause or central reason why the Civil War was fought. All right, and that is problematic. Okay, because these are going to be future lawmakers. These are going to be future police officers. They're going to be teachers, attorneys, hiring managers, things like this. Okay, so this is extremely important. All right, let me flip back over and share the screen. This is running slowly. Okay, hold on. Just a second here. Okay, now let's try to share the screen so you can see. All right, here we go. All right, just bear with me. My computer's running slowly. Okay. The study has some good recommendations also when you go through and look at it, and from Southern Poverty Law Center, and they have recommendations that this information can be properly taught in the schools as well. Okay, so let's bring this up here. All right, and let me skip forward here. You should be able to see this in a minute. Okay, so what kids are really learning about slavery? A new report finds that the topic is mistaught and often sentimentalized, and students are alarmingly misinformed as a result. So this statue right here, this is a statue of Abraham Lincoln, okay? And when you read the caption for this, it says the Lincoln Emancipation Statue, paid for by former enslaved people and erected in Washington, D.C. in 1876, has been criticized for representing the history of slavery from a paternalistic perspective, okay? So if we look at an excerpt from the study, it finds that a new report released by the Southern Poverty Law Center's Teaching Tolerance Project points to the widespread failure to accurately teach the hard and nuanced history of American slavery and enslaved people. Collectively, the report finds that slavery is mistaught, mischaracterized, sanitized, and sentimentalized, leaving students poorly educated and contemporary issues of race and racism misunderstood. Because to understand the transatlantic slave trade, you have to understand white supremacy and racism, okay? And racism is a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race. Okay, so they did a survey of 1,000 American high school seniors and 1,700 social studies teachers across the country. And what they also reviewed 10 commonly used history textbooks as well, okay? And they found that among 12th graders, only 8% of 12th graders could identify slavery as the cause of the Civil War, all right? And fewer than 1/3, or only 32% of high school seniors surveyed correctly named the 13th Amendment as the formal end to slavery, okay? Only 32%. 35% thought it was the Emancipation Proclamation, and the Emancipation Proclamation did not free the enslaved Africans, okay, if you actually read it. And you can go to loc.gov, which is the Library of Congress website. You can actually read it there, okay? And then 46% identified the Middle Passage as the transport of fewer than half. Only 46% was the transport of enslaved Africans across the Atlantic Ocean from Africa to North America to the so-called New World. So you can read this article in its entirety, What Kids Are Really Learning About Slavery, from theatlantic.com, February 1st, 2018. And this is a good article to take in also to the teachers in the school board meetings, etc. Okay. So some of the ways they talk about slavery is currently taught or mistaught in the schools is we teach about slavery without context, preferring to present the good news before the bad news. We tend to subscribe to a progressive view of American history that can acknowledge flaws only to the extent that they have been addressed and solved, meaning that they don't address the flaws that still exist today. They only address flaws they perceive have been solved in the past, okay? We teach about the American enslavement of Africans as an exclusively Southern institution, but at one point, all the Northern colonies had slaves as well. All the 13 colonies, period, had slaves, enslaved Africans. Number 4, we rarely connect slavery to the ideology that grew up to sustain and protect slavery. That was white supremacy, okay? Number 5, we often rely on pedagogy poorly suited to the topic. When we ask teachers to tell us about their favorite lesson when teaching about slavery, dozens proudly reported classroom simulations. Simulations of traumatic experiences is not shown to be effective as a learning strategy and can harm vulnerable children. These slave reenactments and reenactments of slave auctions and things like that, those are psychologically damaging oftentimes to African American children. Number 6, we rarely connect slavery to the ideology that grew up to sustain it and protect the white supremacy. Okay. And 7, we tend to center on the white experience when we teach about slavery. And what's recommended is you incorporate slave narratives, which are firsthand accounts of slavery as well, okay? This study right here was done by Sharita Butler Barnes, a professor at Washington University. TheRoot.com had an article about this. New studies find that positive feelings about Blackness improve academic performance for Black girls. New studies find that positive feelings about Blackness improve academic studies for Black girls. Believing that Black is beautiful, an important mantra of self-acceptance and self-love, could pay major dividends in school, a new study finds, okay? And read the article that they had, that TheRoot.com had. New studies find that positive feelings about Blackness improve academic performance for Black girls. That's from January 10th, 2018. They go more in depth into the study and have a link to the study also. Persons of color who have unhealthy racial identity beliefs tend to perform lower in school and have more symptoms of depression. okay, said Professor Sharita Butler Barnes in this study. We found that feeling positive about being Black and feeling support and belonging at school may be especially important for African American girls' classroom engagement and curiosity. Feeling connected to the school may also work together with racial identity attitudes to improve academic outcomes. Okay. All right. So check that out as well. Okay. So, oh, and this one right here, AfricanGlobe.net had an article about this study. You can research this as well. Black teens with racial pride do better in school. Black teens with racial pride do better in school. African American teenagers perform better academically when their parents instill in them a sense of racial pride. Okay. A new study by the University of Pittsburgh and Harvard University shows that when parents use racial socialization, such as talking to their children or engaging in activity that promote feelings of racial knowledge, discrimination's potentially negative impact on students' academic development. It offsets racial discrimination's potentially negative impact on students' academic development. Okay. Let's see here. Okay. And okay, so those are some studies you can take in to the school board, things like to the school board meetings, to the teachers, etc. When you're trying to get this type of information incorporated into the children's schools. All right. Now, here's some of the things that we deal with in the online course that I teach. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. And these are some of the slides from the actual online course, okay? And this is a 14-hour, 7-session online course that I teach. We do a PowerPoint presentation. We deal with thousands of years of history, thousands of years of African-American history, etc. Okay. And we have it in a bundle pack right now. It's on sale, $60, regularly $130. It's a 10-course online bundle pack. Okay. And it includes great African women in history, the mothers of civilization. It includes African-American resistance in the era of Donald Trump, voter suppression, reparations, and how elections have consequences, and some other online courses that I teach also, okay? All right. Okay, let's continue here. Can you all still hear me? Okay, it dropped out. It dropped out. Okay, hold on. Okay, here we go. I was monitoring the broadcast and it dropped out, but we're still broadcasting. Okay. Just a second. Okay, so let me show you some of the things we cover in the class. All right, let's see here. Let's continue. All right. I'm trying to see where we are. Okay. Okay, so some of the things that I deal with in the online course. We cover about, we don't just deal with 400 or 500 years of history. We deal with like 50,000 years of history at least, but we go back before then, okay? So we do what was the transatlantic slave trade? What were some of the events that led up to the transatlantic slave trade starting? What role did Christopher Columbus play? When did Africans first come to the U.S. as slaves? Because so 2019 is going to be the 400th year anniversary. It's going to be the 400th year anniversary of Jamestown, Virginia, 1619, okay? August 20th, 1619, Jamestown, Virginia, when we're told those 20 some odd Africans first came into the colony. Okay, so you're going to see all types of celebrations next year. Actually, there's a bill sponsored by one of the members of the Congressional Black Caucus to fund research. So nonprofit organizations that do like historical research, things like this, they can actually get funding for various types of commemorations. Now, even though that did happen, what's not talked about is the African presence in this land that we call the United States of America prior to 1619. And the Spanish were taking Africans into the territory we call South Carolina in the 1520s. This is 100 years this is 100 years before that. This is 100 years before that, okay? So that's not even discussed. And then also what's not discussed is this is one of the reasons why you have to understand the history of the Moors and the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors, who were taking the teachings of ancient Kemet into Europe. And Europe is going through the Dark Ages. And see, this is why the movie Black Panther is so important, that people want to speak negatively about. I do 3 presentations. I have 3 different presentations dealing with the film Black Panther. But one, when we look at Wakanda is an example of what Africa could look like if it had never suffered from colonialism and slavery, okay? That's an example of what Africa could look like, because the history of Wakanda was not interrupted by slavery and colonialism. And they are the most technologically advanced country on the face of the earth, okay? 2, when we look at T'Challa, who's the Black Panther, played by Chadwick Boseman, and we study the history of the Black Panther comic book, he's basically the richest in the Marvel comic universe. He's basically like the richest superhero, probably the richest man in the world in the comic book. Well, that relates to Mansa Musa of the Mali Empire, who became emperor in 1312 AD, who was the richest man in history. I mean, he just happened to be an African man, okay? So the film Black Panther relates to African history, culture, spiritual systems, language, and you have to understand some of the history of the Black Panther comic book also. In the 10-course online bundle pack that we have, that includes understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach in school, also includes a online class I did March 31st dealing with the film Black Panther, breaking down the film Black Panther and showing how the film relates to history and African culture as well, okay? All right, so let's continue here. If you need me to post a link again to the online course, you can do that. You can watch from around the world. As soon as you register, you can start watching. These are all on demand. Watch at your own pace, okay? All right, so let's continue here. And this is available also at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, and also African American business owners, post the name of your business here on the thread of the broadcast, and you can email us at customerservice@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. You can find out how to advertise on the audio podcast of our radio shows. We're on 6 different podcast platforms, including iTunes, TuneIn.com, and CastBox. We reach thousands of people on a weekly basis. Okay, so we deal with what role did Christopher Columbus play? Columbus is crucial to understanding the transatlantic slave trade, because Columbus and his 4 voyages helped to spread racism, slavery, capitalism, and the exploitation of indigenous people. And when you read The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence by Dr. David Imhotep, you'll find out that 70% of the people Columbus encountered on his 4 voyages were African people, okay? At least 70% of the people Columbus encountered on his 4 voyages were African people. We were already in those areas. This does not mean the transatlantic slave trade did not happen. People, different types of migrations happen at different times. Some migrations are voluntary, some migrations are forced migration, okay? So we have to understand the chronology of history. Did Africans sell themselves into slavery? We deal with that complicated history because it's not, oftentimes it's not taught the way it actually had. And people like Henry Louis Gates Jr. take exceptions to the rule and try to extrapolate that over the entire history and try to make that the rule. Were African people in America before the slave trade? Yes, we were. This was our land stolen from us. We were here before Native Americans came into existence. And Dr. David Imhotep talks about this. We'll talk about that in just a minute. We deal with the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors, shocking archaeological discoveries, shocking archaeological discoveries that are causing experts to rethink everything. When these archaeological discoveries take place, like in 2017, I think it was around June of 2017, you had skeletal remains of Homo sapiens, modern man, found in Morocco, in North Africa, in Morocco. They dated back between 300,000 to 350,000 years ago. Now, this blew the archaeologists away because the oldest human remains they had prior to that were found in Ethiopia that date back 195,000 years ago. And it's saying it's causing them to have to rethink everything. And it's causing them to understand that migrations happen much earlier than they thought they happened, okay? And they said, we're gonna have to start looking, for human, for remains of humans in places we never thought to look before. Okay, so we deal with the archaeological discoveries that are being made, and you have discoveries coming out every other month. I mean, it's amazing what's being found, okay? And a lot of the major news outlets are writing articles about this. Now, you may not see a lot of stories about it on cable TV, but like when you go to NBCnews.com, you go to CNN.com, they have stories about this stuff. I've seen them. Okay, so we deal with the archaeological discoveries that are coming out also. And some of the things that are being discovered are amazing. We deal with insurance companies that took out insurance policies on slave ships and enslaved Africans on plantations. That was a big part. It wasn't just on the slave ships and the cargo on the ships that insurance policies were taken out on. There are documented cases of slave owners taking out insurance policies on certain slaves on the plantation, okay? Because see, there were at least 262 skills, trades, and crafts that African people had in this country from 1619 to 1865. There were at least 262 skills, trades, and crafts that African people had in this country from 1619 to 1865, okay? And a lot of them were very dangerous, working on steamships, working in sawmills, working in coal mines. A lot of them were very dangerous. So they would take out insurance policies on certain slaves on the plantation. And when that slave died, they would cash in on the policy and get 3/4 of their investment back, okay? One of the first insurance companies to take out insurance policies on slaves in this country was the Nautilus Mutual Life Insurance Company, founded in Manhattan in the spring of 1845. And in the first 3 years of their existence, they took out 508 insurance policies on enslaved Africans. They're going to change their name a few years after that to the New York Life Insurance Company. So this is real history, okay? And the New York Life Insurance Company they openly admitted the early participation in slavery selling insurance policies, okay? So you had over 40 insurance companies that did this here in the US. You had over 40 insurance companies that did this here in the US. All right, how's everybody doing? Okay, where can you get this shirt? Now, I got this shirt in Atlanta. My girlfriend got this for me. Uh, Brittany, Herb Alchemist, got this for me for my birthday in Atlanta. From one of the vendors I've seen, I gotta check. I think one of the vendors, I think the brother Khalil has this here in Detroit. So I'll see. But you know, you got Dr. Francis Chris Wilson, Michelle Obama. Michelle Obama said, "I will always be your first lady." I'll take Michelle Obama over Melania any day of the week. And all this is not Melania's fault because Melania did not think Donald Trump was going to win. That Melania didn't marry a politician, but I'll take Michelle over Melania any day of the week. Okay, I'm just saying. All right. All right. Hey, if you like this type of information also and you want to donate to the African History Network, you can do that. PayPal.me/the AHN show. PayPal.me/the AHN show. That helps support the African History Network. That helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, pay the bills, keep broadcasting. And when I have to travel to different events, like I'm headed to Philadelphia at the end of the month for the All Black National Convention, that helps with that as well. Okay. PayPal.me/the AHN show. If you want to set up a recurring donation, you can do that also. If you want to donate $15, $25, $50, $100, what have you, you can do a one-time donation or you can set it up for a recurring donation as well. So we definitely appreciate that. All right. So let's continue here. And let me do the share again. Share the screen. Okay. And if you need me to post a link so you can register for the online courses I teach, let me know. Also, I'll post that again. And it's also available at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com right on the home page. Remember, these are all on demand. Watch at your own pace. Watch them around the world. So we deal with the role that insurance companies played in the transatlantic slave trade, but especially here in this country as well. We talk about Freemasonry, America, and the founding fathers, because oftentimes this is not talked about. And Tony Browder does a really good job of doing this in Egypt on the Potomac, by Tony Browder, Egypt on the Potomac. We deal with origins of the terms America and Africa and more, because it's not what people really think they are. Africa was not named after a Roman general named Publius Cornelius Scipio. Because when you study the history of his family, the family's last name was not Africanus, it was Scipio. We deal with the problem with slave movies, why we're being bombarded with slave movies and a slave-themed TV show. Asar, Set, and Heru, who the Greeks called Osiris, Isis, and Horus, and the origins of the Immaculate Conception story. Now, some of this may go outside of the circumference of your own awareness, but I provide overwhelming evidence to document what I'm talking about. Links to ancient Kemet or Egypt, because Kemet's one of the original names for Egypt, Kemet meaning the land of the blacks, and early Christianity. The fake Willie Lynch letter of 1712, because Willie Lynch never historically existed, okay? And then in the bundle pack, because it's a 10-course online bundle pack, it includes ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach in school. Within the bundle pack, you also get the online class I do dealing with the film Black Panther. It's one of my early presentations dealing with the film Black Panther, and I deal with some background history. I deal with the connection to African culture, African history, things like this. So now, if we look at this right here. So in Dr. David Imhotep's book, The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence, and you can visit his website, historictruth.info, historictruth.info. He deals with he has a 2-page abstract of his book there that you can download, okay, for free. It gives you an overview of the book. Yeah, I said the fake Willie Lynch letter. Willie Lynch never historically existed, okay? Willie Lynch never historically existed. When you study slave narratives and things like this, they don't talk about a Willie Lynch. Also, there are words in the Willie Lynch letter of 1712 that didn't even exist in the 18th century, or the way that they were used in the early 18th century and 1812 were different than they're used today. You have words like self-refueling that comes from the 20th century transportation industry. The Willie Lynch letter was written in 1970 by Dr. Kwabena Ashanti. Dr. Kwabena Ashanti, Google him. He's come out and admitted he wrote it. Okay, it's a fraud. Willie Lynch never historically existed. All right, so on page 14 of Dr. David Imhotep's book, he deals with evidence of an African presence that dates back 51,700 years ago, found in a campsite in Allendale County, South Carolina, discovered by archaeologist Dr. Albert Goodyear. Okay, and they found artifacts, architecture, campsites, carvings, Egyptian writings, footprints in lava, genetic M174D haploid groups dealing with DNA and genetics, linguistics, paintings, skulls, skeleton structures, and tools. His book has 713 footnotes, thoroughly documenting an African presence in South America going back at least 56,000 years ago. In this land we call the United States of America going back at least 51,700 years ago. These were the Khoisan. The Khoisan have the oldest DNA on the planet. They come from Southern Africa. They're the ancestors to the Ainu and the Twa. They go all around the world. And also, these are the early pyramid mound builders as well. Okay, you have pyramid mounds built up and down the Mississippi River. A lot of them have been dismantled. One of the last remaining ones is Cahokia in East Illinois. Cahokia in East Illinois. And if you saw Hidden Colors 2, they talk about Cahokia in there. So you have Asians that come to this land about 3000 BC, about 5,000 years ago. The Africans and the Asians are going to intermix, and their offspring are who we call Native Americans. When you look at old black and white photographs of Native Americans, okay, you look at old black and white photographs of Native Americans, these were usually dark-skinned people, and a lot of times they had high cheekbones, but these were usually a dark-skinned people. They were not usually the very light-skinned, almost white-looking Native Americans that you'll see a lot today. And there's a reason why, okay? And then also the other thing that happens is that when European settlers come to this land, a lot of the different African groups that were already here, a lot of them get reclassified as Native Americans. So if you don't understand this history, then you don't know what to look for, okay? Now, this is an article from ScienceDaily.com. ScienceDaily.com is a scientific website, scientific journal. And they had an article from 2004, November 18, 2004, called New Evidence Puts Man in North America 50,000 Years Ago. New Evidence Puts Man in North America 50,000 years ago. You can go read this article for yourself, okay? This is a synopsis of what the article said. Radiocarbon tests of carbonized plant remains where artifacts were unearthed last May along the Savannah River in Allendale County by University of South Carolina archaeologist Dr. Albert Goodyear indicate that the sediments contained in these artifacts are at least 50,000 years old, meaning that humans inhabited North America long before the last ice age. Now, this is not me saying this. This is not Dr. David Imhotep saying it. This is what ScienceDaily.com is saying about Dr. Albert Goodyear's discovery. Now, this is a picture of Dr. Albert Goodyear. He happens to be a white man. He's an archaeologist at the University of South Carolina. This discovery was made 14 years ago. This article is 14 years old. It's still there at ScienceDaily.com. You can go read it when you get finished watching this video. And then this one right here, very quickly, this is another discovery we talk about because Dr. David Imhotep deals with this in his book and also in a video, an interview that WKRP in Cincinnati, Channel 5 did with them. On Crete, new evidence of very ancient mariners. This is from the New York Times, February 15, 2010, 8 years ago. On Crete, new evidence of very ancient mariners. This deals with archaeological discoveries on the Greek island of Crete over the course of 2 summers. Well, archaeologists found stone tools that date back at least 130,000 years ago. And Crete has been an island for more than 5 million years, which basically means that the African people sailed there. They had to sail there. Crete has been an island for more than 5 million years. And they found stone tools that date back 130,000 years ago. You can read this. You can read this yourself, okay? You can read the full article, all right? So we deal with a lot of the archaeological discoveries. We talk about Thomas Heraclion, the lost city of Egypt, which was swallowed into the sea about 1,200 years ago. And we know discoveries made about 2000, the year 2000, and they revealed what they found in 2013. You know, they found 64 ships, 16-foot tall statues, 700 anchors, countless gold coins and smaller artifacts. They found, 16-foot tall statues of Isis or Offset at the bottom of the sea. Okay, I did a lot of reporting on this discovery when the information came out about it. All right. So, like I said, we deal with the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors, and the connection between the Moors and ancient Kemet. We see that the Washington Monument, which is 555 feet tall, we see that's an ancient African symbol, a symbol of resurrection, dealing with a Sar. It's a symbol of resurrection and transformation. It's called a Tekken, who the Greeks called an obelisk. We know there are about 1,200 Tekkenu all throughout ancient Kemet. Today, there are only about 12. Okay, but it's the Africans known as the Moors who are taking the teachings from ancient Egypt and from ancient Africa into Europe. And these teachers are going to bring Europe out of the Dark Ages and save Europe. And then all this stuff is going to come back and kick us in the behind. Because you have some of these Europeans are going to enslave when they when the Moors lose control of their last stronghold in Spain, Grenada, January 2nd, 1492. You have Moors who are fleeing Spain. You have some, they're losing power in different parts of Europe because they go all throughout Europe. And you have some that are going to be enslaved. And the Spanish are taking the conquered Moors into Spanish territories, into Spanish colonies, and they bring them here. They bring some of them here. They take them into Florida. They take them into South Carolina. Okay, because keep in mind, the Spanish were involved in the transatlantic slave trade before the English got involved. The Portuguese were the first ones about 1441, 1441. The Spanish are right behind them. And you look at where Spain and Portugal are geographically, they're right next to each other. Okay? All right, so, and they're right above North Africa, they're right above Morocco. Okay, so when the Moors go in 711 AD, it was called the Iberian Peninsula. It wasn't called Spain and Portugal. But when we look at Freemasonry, the word Mason is derived from the Latin words mass and sun. The Latin words mass and sun. Mason means child of light and expresses the desire to pursue light, which is a metaphor for the sun, which symbolizes light. Okay, Mason means child of light. The term child of light, or sons and daughters of light, was first used to identify students who had completed 42 years of study in the temples of ancient Kemet or ancient Egypt. Many Masonic temples were modeled after the temples of Kemet, places where light or knowledge was imparted in a series of steps or degrees. So when you go to college and get your credentials in a series of degrees, this is where this comes from. When you study the liberal arts, the 7 liberal arts were taught in the ancient temples, the trivium and the quadrivium, the 3 and the 4, the rhetoric, the logic, the arithmetic, things like this. George G.M. James talks about this in Stolen Legacy. The liberal arts comes from the temples, the institutions in ancient Egypt. That comes from us. For more information, read pages 18 and 32 of Egypt on the Potomac by Tony Browder. That's one of the books I reference in the online course. You don't have to buy any of these books to follow along and to learn, but we cite sources. We provide you with these sources so you can, some of you may have this book at home, Egypt on the Potomac by Tony Browder. All right. And then 50 of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence were Freemasons. So Freemasonry is incorporated into the layout of Washington, D.C. We know Benjamin Banneker, who had a photographic memory. We know that he did the layout of Washington, D.C., right? He was the surveyor. Okay. But Freemasonry is incorporated into the layout of Washington, D.C. And what Browder does, if you ever get a chance, Browder lives in the DMV area. And he does a tour of Washington, D.C. called Egypt on the Potomac. And that's the name of his book also, one of his books. But he takes you around Washington, D.C. and he shows you how the layout of Washington, D.C. is a copy of the layout of ancient Egypt. And a lot of our people live in D.C. have no clue about this. We don't understand our history. We don't understand how powerful we are. Okay. And here's a bronze statue, or gold bronze statue of Asar, Aset, and Heru. Osiris or Osiris in the middle. Known as the First Holy Trinity. And the Greeks called them Osiris, Isis, and Horus. We see a copy of Aset, who the Greeks call Isis, reinterpreted into the superheroine from DC Comics and depicted in the 1970s Saturday morning TV show called The Secrets of Isis. How do we know? Because I used to watch it when I was a kid. Saturday morning, I used to watch the Shazam and Isis hour on CBS every Saturday morning. And they showed this white woman and they said she got her powers from ancient Egypt. Okay. And they talked about ancient Kemetic deities, nectar, things like this. But I didn't know none of that when I was a kid watching this. I just saw this white woman with all these superpowers, but we didn't know she was a copy of Aset, who was according to the mythology, was the first African queen of Kemet. Okay, but Aset gives birth to Heru on December 25th through an immaculate conception, a virgin birth. Okay, so this is why I said, with a real Isis, please stand up, because see, you have a theft of our culture and theft of our history reinterpreted through someone else's cultural paradigm with their names put on it, their ethnicity put on it, and they represent it to the world like they created it themselves. And we sit back amazed at it. Oh my God, they must be superior. Okay, so so from the original Aset and Heru, we get the Black Madonna and Child, which was worshipped all throughout Europe. All throughout Europe, Europeans, like in the Dark Ages, okay, Europeans worship the African woman. They worship African people. And they still have statues of the Black Madonna and Child, like in Poland, in Rome, in the Vatican. They still have statues today. But what happened was, with the rise of white supremacy, as Europeans are coming out of the Dark Ages, as they're circumnavigating the globe, as they're conquering people's lands, as you have the spread of what we call white supremacy. It wasn't called white supremacy then, but this ideology coming from manifest destiny, that because they're Christians and God gave them the authority to go and conquer people and take their land, things like this. As they start conquering people's land, as the transatlantic slave trade spreads, as they start taking the wealth and the riches out of the lands they're conquering, the gold and the silver, things like this, and they start to rebuild Europe, as you have an increase in these European powers, you have an increase in the desire and the popularity of the European phenotype. This is very important, okay? Because it used to be that dark skin was basically worshipped by Europeans. But as things shift and you have a rise of white supremacy and European culture becomes dominant, European ideologies become dominant. European Christianity becomes dominant. The European phenotype becomes dominant. And you have these historical figures that were historically African get reinterpreted as European. So we have Michelangelo painting the Sistine Chapel using his relatives as the model for Adam and Eve and God and things like this. And this is how you get the white Mary and Jesus, the decolorized version. This is how you get this, okay? So we have to understand our history. So these are some of the things we deal with. We deal with, you know, why is Christmas celebrated on December 25th? Because nowhere in the biblical text does it state that Jesus the Christ was born on December 25th. This may go outside the circumference of some people's awareness, but show me, quote me, chapter and verse in the biblical text, not the commentary, but the biblical text where it says that Jesus the Christ was born on December 25th. Okay, and if you actually understand history, you understand the letter J wasn't even created till 1630 AD. The letter J is derived from the letter I. This is why the original name was Yeshua. Okay, this is why in Islam, the prophet is not called Jesus, he's called Isa with an I, because the letter J wasn't created till 1630 AD. So even in the story, Jesus is not what his mama called, because J didn't exist. But if you don't understand language, you don't understand this. You just go with what they're telling you. You just go with the flow. So Dr. Francis Cress Wilson and Nellie Fuller taught us that if you do not understand European white supremacy and racism, what it is and how it works, everything else that you think that you understand will totally confuse you. If you do not understand European white supremacy and racism, what it is and how it works, everything else that you think that you understand will totally confuse you. This is her famous book, The ISIS Papers. I knew Dr. Wilson. I interviewed her 3 times. We have almost 900 audio podcasts of our radio shows and my interviews at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. A lot of the scholars I've interviewed, a lot of them are some of my teachers. And then also you can, like I said, register for the online courses that I teach. They're all on demand. We have them in a bundle pack. We make it affordable. It's on sale right now. $60, regularly $130. And that includes ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school, okay? And that's a 14-hour, 7-session online course. There are other courses in the bundle pack. All this is all on demand. You can watch from around the world. Also included is Great African Women in History, the Mothers of Civilization. Great African Women in History, the Mothers of Civilization. And African-American Resistance in the Era of Donald Trump, Voter Suppression, Reparations, and How Elections Have Consequences. So those are just a few of the presentation. All right, so here's Dr. Leonard Jeffries. Dr. J is one of my teachers. He's probably at the Congressional Black Caucus weekend right now, because at the CBC weekend each year, there's a big forum, there's a big panel discussion dealing with reparations. And when I went to the CBC weekend back in 2015, when I was on the Empowerment Radio Network, and we were broadcasting from there, he was there. So when Dr. Leonard Jeffries and Professor James Small, who are 2 of my teachers, when they teach, they talk about the pyramid principle. And I've kind of modified this, but I incorporate this into my presentation. In our foundation is African history and culture. Here's the pyramid of Khafre at Giza, okay, in Egypt. And the foundation is African history and culture. This gives you your VIPs, your values, your interests, and your principles. This gives you your cultural paradigm that you see reality through, okay? And the 2 sides of the pyramid are economic empowerment and political empowerment, okay? And I talk about economic guerrilla warfare and economic empowerment. And with political empowerment, I deal with a concept that I call political self-defense. political self-defense. And I do one of the presentations I do dealing with the film Black Panther is called Lessons from the Film Black Panther: Economic Guerrilla Warfare, Political Self-Defense, and How to Wakanda to Vote. I actually did a version of that presentation at the Black Homeschooling Conference in July 2018, third weekend in July, because I'm usually one of the speakers at the Black Homeschooling Conference, and I'm one of the vendors, okay? And so we have to have a synthesis of all three of these. It's not one or the other. The history and culture influences our economic empowerment, okay? And we have a $1.3 trillion economy. Unfortunately, 97% of our dollars are spent with people that don't look like us. The reason why is because that foundation is not intact. We've been stripped of our history and culture, and every ethnic group in America uses their history and culture to fight for scarce wealth, power, and resources. They fight for scarce wealth, power, and resources. We've been taught to see reality through the eyes of Europeans, so we give away 90% of our dollars to people that don't look like us, which is the opposite of what other ethnic groups do. And if you don't control your economics, you won't be able to fully control your politics. That does not mean don't vote, because you can leverage your economics to enforce your political agenda, okay? And if more of us voted strategically and voted a lot of these people out of office who are doing us harm, we would see a big improvement. Because we don't understand what politics is. Politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources. Politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources. And politics is the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. Politics impacts every aspect of your life. People don't understand this. So we have to have a synthesis of the African history and culture, the economic empowerment, economic guerrilla warfare, political empowerment, political self-defense. Dr. Jeffries teaches us that whoever controls the images controls your self-esteem, self-respect, and self-development. Whoever controls the history controls the vision, okay? All right. And I talked about Bantu Stephen Biko, who taught us that the most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. The most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. And what our people don't understand is that all the negative things that we complain about usually in society, most of that are the side effects of bad public policy. The side effects of bad public policy. Well, who writes the public policy? Politicians. These are elected officials, okay? We have to leverage our economics to enforce our political agenda, and we have to fire a lot of these bad politicians, okay? Because because a lot of times, see, this is what people didn't understand in the 2016 election cycle. And I do a whole presentation called African-American Resistance in the Era of Donald Trump, Voter Suppression, Reparations, and How Elections Have Consequences. And I deal with three main things. I deal with the similarities between Richard Nixon becoming president in 1968, winning the election, and Donald Trump winning the election in 2016, and how Richard Nixon was a backlash to the political climate at the time. He was a backlash to the Black Power movement, the Civil Rights movement, affirmative action, the rebellions that were taking place all across the country, the African Americans rebelling. He was a backlash to all of that. He ran on the platform of law and order. And then June 17, 1971, what does Richard Nixon do? He declares his war on drugs, which starts the mass incarceration. Mass incarceration didn't start September 13, 1994, when Bill Clinton signed the Clinton crime bill. Not at all. Mass incarceration had already started going back to the 1970s. Furthermore, the Clinton crime bill, what people don't understand, and Vox.com had a really good article breaking this history down. 87% of the people that went to prison during the 2 terms of Bill Clinton, they went under state law, not federal law. The crime bill was federal law. States had already started passing longer, harsher sentences in the 1970s, 80s, and early 90s before the crime bill was even signed. People, I'm not saying the crime bill was good. I'm saying people totally misunderstand what the crime bill was and the impact that it had, okay? This is why we have to deal with facts and evidence, not opinions. not feelings and emotions and opinions. I'll try to give you the name of that article. But also I deal with how Trump is systematically reversing policies President Obama had in place. And many of those policies were beneficial for us, for African Americans, but we don't know this because we haven't researched any of it. And then third, I deal with the rampant voter suppression that took place during the 2016 election cycle as well, okay, that we still haven't figured out. And there was rampant voter suppression because Republicans feared the power of the African American vote, and they feared our vote more than we valued our vote. Okay, because in 2012, the 2012 election, you had a record turnout of African Americans. 66% of African Americans registered to vote voted. This scared the hell out of Republicans. And then after the U.S. Supreme Court case of Shelby County versus Holder in 2013, which gutted Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which was the pre-clearance, which was the oversight, then you had a whole new round. You have all these new voter ID laws that pop up. So in the 2016 election cycle, you have 14 new states that had new voter ID laws, okay? People aren't paying attention to this. And then we still don't understand how the Electoral College works. Because most of the people telling you that the popular vote doesn't matter and the Electoral College chooses the president, you know, I didn't hear one Donald Trump supporter say that. They said, we're going to vote for Donald Trump. But all of a sudden, Black people are Electoral College experts and constitutional law experts. Okay? I ain't hear one Donald Trump supporter say, we don't choose a president, the Electoral College choose a president. And I saw dozens of interviews with Donald Trump supporters during the election. They said, we're going to vote for Donald Trump. They ain't say nothing about the Electoral College. They said, this is about the Supreme Court. They said, this is about abortion. They said, this is about undocumented immigrants. All this, they said, we're going to vote for Donald Trump. All of a sudden, Black people became Electoral College experts. But let me ask you a question. Who can answer this question? Who can answer this question for me? How did Donald Trump become president-elect? The morning of November 9th, 2016, when the Electoral College doesn't vote to the first Monday following the second Wednesday in December. How did that happen? I'll wait. See, we don't understand how the Electoral College, well, even the people who talk about the Electoral College don't understand how it works. Because when I ask them certain questions, and I've gone and researched the history of the Electoral College as well as the 12th Amendment of 1803, when I go ask them questions, they can't answer. Read this article. The Clinton-backed 1994 crime law had many flaws, but it didn't create mass incarceration. That's from August 8th, 2016 from Vox.com. Okay. All right, let's continue here. Let me see if I can find this link for you to this article. I'll post it when we're done. Yeah, this is from Vox.com. You got to read this from Vox.com. All right. Okay. So those are some of the things we deal with in the online course, and a lot more that I teach. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. We'll come to some of your comments here. That's we have a 10-course online bundle pack. That's one of the courses in the online bundle pack. It's a great value. It's on sale right now, $60, regularly $130. These are all on demand. Watch at your own pace. Watch from around the world. Watch as much as you want to. Okay, Carolyn Mack said, okay, responding to Weston. Okay, she's responding to a comment. Lex says, say that again. We don't understand the Electoral College. You cannot win the electoral votes associated with a state without winning the popular vote in the state. Okay, and we don't understand that. For the most, whether you get all the popular votes or part of it, whether you get all the Electoral College votes or part of them, is based upon you winning the popular vote in the state. This is why Republicans engaged in massive voter suppression efforts in those key battleground states. And we got outmaneuvered and didn't even understand this and still don't understand. We don't understand the cross-checking system that knocked 1.1 million people off the voter rolls and targeted people with ethnic sounding names. They used all these tactics and we don't even understand this stuff. Darlene said it makes sense that if you do not get a basic education and you do things to make money that go against the norm, we have to still eat, and they are making the rules that limit us to engage in society because we do not attend the public meeting. We have to pay attention to what they did in Alabama because, see, they realized in Alabama how politics is negatively impacting them, how laws are impacting them. And African Americans like DeJuan Thompson with the Woke Vote campaign, and Darlene Sanders with, I think it's Vote or Die campaign. They financed their movements, they financed their campaigns, they registered people to vote. And they saw that Roy Moore was going to be deaf for the US Senate. And they saw that Doug Jones' policies better matched up with their issues. Okay, I dealt with this a lot on my radio show and dealt with the policy issues of Roy Moore and Doug Jones. NBC News had NBCnews.com had an article that showed a comparison, and they voted for Doug Jones and got him in office and stopped Roy Moore. Okay, because they understood how politics is negatively impacting them. Alabama is #1 in the state in the country in incarceration, and they're 49th in education in the country. Okay, so are you aware of all the contracts that are issued in public school education? Just how many are issues to people who look like? Yeah, I'm aware of that. Okay. Carolyn, Lex, Darlene. Let's see here. Ann Weston said, I don't know if this is a good reason to homeschool children. Children need to be exposed to other races and nationality. Well, first they need to develop a love for their own people, #1, because the larger society is not teaching them to do this. 2, if you read the article that from newsone.com that talks about the segment from NBC News, and you actually watch the segment from NBC News, African American parents who homeschool their children are interviewed, and they talk about the other ways that their children interact with other children. 2, you can create homeschool networks. I think you came in late on this broadcast. Go back and watch it from the beginning. You can create homeschool networks where groups of children get schooled at a time. Okay, people should really go and check out liberatedmindsexpo.com, because that's the official website for the Liberated Minds Homeschooling Education Expo that takes place the 3rd weekend in July each year. And that expo, this is where you have a lot of experts in homeschooling, and even some that run Black homeschools. Okay, so you can get curriculums, you can get books, you can get DVDs, you can get a lot of material. I'm there each year, the 3rd weekend in July. I was there this past July. I'm one of the presenters usually, and I'm a vendor there also. Okay. All right. Okay. All right, so check all this out. You can go back and watch this from the beginning. We'll put this on our YouTube channel also, Michael Imhotep on YouTube. If you are an African-American business owner, post the name of your business here on the thread of the broadcast. Then also you can advertise with the African History Network. You can advertise on the podcast of our radio show, the African History Network show. And then some of the podcasts I do throughout the week. Facebook Live broadcasts I do, we turn those into audio podcasts. And We can add your 30-second to 60-second commercial into the podcast. If you don't have a commercial, we can record one for you. And we reach thousands of people on a weekly basis. We're on 6 different podcast platforms: Blog Talk Radio, iTunes, Castbox, Acast, FM Player, and TuneIn.com. We reach thousands of people on a weekly basis. So this is a very effective, low-cost way for you to gain new customers. Also, email us at customerservice@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com for more information as well, okay? All right, so look, hey, we're going to get out of here. Also, those in Detroit, hey, Renoko Rashidi is speaking in Detroit today at True Oracle of God Ministries Church, 1500 East State Fair, 1500 East State Fair in Detroit. Renoko Rashidi, the world traveler, historian, author. He's featured in Hidden Colors 2. So he's speaking 6:30 p.m. tonight. Admission is $15. It is with the 35th anniversary of service for Minister Malik Shabazz. So he's there speaking for that event. 1500 East State Fair, True Oracle of God Ministries Church, at Hull Street, 6 blocks east of I-75 freeway. And I'll be there as well. I'll be a vendor tonight also. We have the information at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Information's there, okay? So come on out. All right. Hey, remember at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's corrects wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. Remember, right now is corrects wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you next time. And those in Philadelphia, hey, I'll be at the All Black National Convention in Philadelphia, September 18th through September 28th through the 30th. Okay, that weekend, September 28th through the 30th. Okay, go to allblacknationalconvention.com. And that is that's organized by Dr. Boyce Watkins. So I'll be there. I'm on a panel discussion dealing with why we must buy black on Saturday. Dr. Claude Anderson will be speaking there. Kenny Gamble of Gamble and Huff will be there as well. You don't want to miss it. Visit allblacknationalconvention.com, allblacknationalconvention.com. All right. Listen to the African History Network show Sundays, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation WFDF in Detroit. We broadcast here on Facebook Live when I'm live in the studio, broadcasting the show. Visit AfricanHistoryNetwork.com for more information. You can listen to the podcast there. Remember, right now it's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. We'll talk to you next time. Peace.